hello friends, and welcome to Ariel's Twilight Years, how to be a really old model. Oh my god, it is the publication month. Finally! For Playing to Lose. I can't believe we've almost got there. It's been a very long journey, as those of you who followed my work for a while will know, but the last 18 months has been full of excitement and work, because that's been the 18 months in which I've had a publisher working on it with me. This month I am doing a collaboration because another author of a memoir, who is also a submissive, who has also written about her BDSM experiences, got in touch with me a few months ago, and we have stayed in touch since, and we decided to make a video that we would both edit to our own specifications. She is Elizabeth Hackford. Her book is called Exodai, and I believe that it will be coming out in September. If you look at the show notes below, there will be links to all of her platforms. I've read her book and it's great. She's in the middle, I think, of reading my book, and our books are very different, but of course having some of the same interests and some of the same needs means there are some similarities too. So we decided to put some questions together, half of which were chosen by Elizabeth and half of which were chosen by me, and I'm going to ask those questions and you are going to hear our answers. Let's see how similar those answers are. First of all, brief introductions to ourselves and our books.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Hackford. I'm the author of Exodai. Now, originally I graduated in mathematics in 1994 and then pursued a career in financial services. But at the time when I started my job, I was pretty depressed because I actually prefer women. And I was very depressed about my sexuality and kind of running away from it all. When I was 27, I moved to Tokyo. Now, this was a life-changing move. Basically, in Tokyo, I discovered the BDSM scene and I went off on all these amazing adventures at the same time as holding down my job in financial services. Now, the whole story is contained within my book, Exodai. This is what it's going to look like. It's coming out in September 2023 and it will be available on Amazon only. It basically covers the whole story of why I didn't love myself, when I realised that there was an issue and the steps I took to get over that. And it incorporates my whole relationship with the BDSM world, and in particular it focuses on a relationship I had with a Japanese dominatrix where I became her slave for 2 years. If you are watching this before the book is launched, you can go to my website www.exodai.co.uk and sign up so you get notifications about when the book is available. If it's already September 23rd, 2023, then just go to Amazon, type in Exodai, and you should be able to find my book.
I'm Ariel Anderson. I am a veteran BDSM model. I've been working in this field for 20 years this November, and I have specialised in submissive BDSM work, both bondage and spanking and all the things that are somewhat associated with that. But apart from my BDSM work, I've done a great deal of mainstream modelling work as well. I am naked all over the internet. Sorry if that's not your thing. My book is a memoir tracing my journey from growing up in a religious cult as a Jehovah's Witness to becoming a professional kinky person. That journey has been full of complexity because, having grown up in such a strict religion, I was very much conditioned to think everything I wanted to do might be wrong, might even be evil. And so to come so far and to do such a edgy job that so many people would think was unacceptable, that is quite a genuinely socially unacceptable job, that has been quite a dramatic journey. And along the way, a great deal of things happened, some terrible, some wonderful, and I put all the best bits and all the worst bits into my memoir, which is coming out on the 24th of August.
Question 1. When did you first know that you were into BDSM? Well, in my case, I knew from a very young age. I almost knew I was into BDSM before I knew I was a lesbian. When I was age 6, I was at school and I remember I had a very specific fantasy about being clamped to this big white platform, sort of Star Trek style, and this big lid coming down to cocoon me, and I couldn't escape because I was all clamped to this strange table, and all my classmates were around watching with a sense of ownership. And it was this feeling of not being able to escape and being humiliated that kind of turned me on. Now, I had no idea when I was 6, 7, 8 years old what was happening, but often Mum would switch out the light, I would go to bed, and I would have these fantasies going on in my head, and I'd start to need to go to the toilet. And I thought, why do I need to go to the toilet? I'd get out of bed, go to the toilet, there's nothing to come. And of course, what was actually happening was, even from the young age of 8, 9 or 10, I was starting to stimulate something down there. But I had no idea, had no notion of BDSM, no idea what it was all about. But those were my first fantasies coming in at age 6.
I wish this was a happier story, but given my religious background, I guess it's inevitable that it wouldn't have been. I didn't know BDSM was a thing until I was 16 years old, and a Conservative MP was found dead, apparently having been the victim of an autoerotic asphyxiation adventure gone wrong. And I was 16 years old and at sixth form college, and the newspapers were full of this story. And they referred to him as a sadomasochist. And I'd never heard that term before, but as I read on, I discovered that a sadomasochist was someone who enjoyed pain as pleasure, essentially. And I realised with horror, that's what I was, that's who I was. I thought, I guess there were two of us, and now there's only one of us because one of us has killed himself. And if anyone ever finds out that I'm like him, people will mock me the way they are mocking him in these newspaper articles, and it was one of the very worst times of my life. I hope Elizabeth has a happier story. Question 2. What would you say to people who think that submissive women have just internalised misogyny and turned it against themselves? Well, first of all, I'd say, what about lesbian submissives? That's what I'd say, because how can you say that a woman who wants to experience submission and potentially pain from another woman is doing it out of any kind of misogyny? I'd also say, what about submissive men? What are they doing? Is their desire actually internalised misogyny? Because if so, how? And thirdly, I'd say my first memories of wanting to experience these things was so early in my life. I find it hard to believe that I'd absorbed much in the way of misogyny when I was only 2.5 years old. It's not impossible that I'd picked up on some of the idea that men were in charge of everything, but my feeling is that whatever society I'd grown up in, however egalitarian, and however unaware I might have been about the history of gender relations, I just cannot see how this elemental, precious, central part of me could possibly have been anything other than what it is. It feels DNA deep, and I find it hard to believe that this was something that was bolted onto me as a result of the way society is. It just feels elemental, like my beating heart and my size 9 feet and my big head and my blue eyes.
That's a very difficult question. Now, first of all, what springs to mind is Ephesians 5 verse 22. I did look it up before, but anyway, wives, submit to your husband as you submit to the Lord. So I think that Christian women, very born-again evangelical women, who subscribe to that Bible passage and take it verbatim, well then I think they've clearly internalised misogyny, because that's probably been bred into them from their childhood. I think all of us have internalised misogyny to some extent, but have submissive women in the context of BDSM, have they internalised misogyny? No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. They've found a way of life, and if that means submitting to a man in a very controlled environment, in a consensual arrangement, that has nothing to do with this kind of submission. And people who say that submissive women have internalised misogyny are completely missing the point of BDSM. And as Ariel says, what about submissive men? Question 3, has your Christian faith, or lack of it, made accepting your kink harder in some ways or easier in some ways? Well, that's quite interesting for me, because I can make an analogy here. My fetish interests, which started from a very young age, I kept to myself. I didn't start exploring BDSM until I was at university, and I didn't really properly explore until I was 27, 28 years old and living in Tokyo. So when I started to come out, if you will, as a fetishist, I basically was already adult. Now, compare that to my sexuality. I started fancying girls from a very young age, from around the age of 4, 5 or 6. But I was openly gay at school, and I was in a very traditional school, and I was also brought up as a Christian. Everything I read in the Bible couldn't endorse homosexuality, which is tantamount to lesbianism. So I was completely at odds with my natural innate sexuality. And all of my classmates around me also thought I had a problem, particularly when my period started. They thought I was going to miraculously overnight start fancying men. So in fact, my Christianity made it incredibly hard to accept my sexuality, whereas my BDSM fetishist instincts I didn't explore until I was an adult and in an adult environment. And so I never had any issue, even though I was very Christian at the time, and I actually intrinsically fused the two. When I was into BDSM in Tokyo and actually going to BDSM bars and getting properly flagellated, I was actually taking the prayers of the church with me, because under the whip I would reach this trance-like state, very energetic vibration, and I would use that state of mind to offer the prayers of the church. So I never had an issue from my Christian standpoint about my BDSM interests. The problem was my sexuality.
I've got an interesting story with this. When I told my sister, my older and wise big sister, eventually what I was into, she told me that there was actually a website she'd heard about that was for kinky Christians. And I was really excited because by this point I wasn't a Jehovah's Witness anymore. The whole family had become Christians. And the idea of being able to join a community of Christians who were kink positive, from whom I might be able to meet a kinky partner who was also a Christian, which is what I thought I needed to have. This was a very exciting idea, so I went along and joined and discovered that they only accepted male doms and female subs. Now, on one hand, I'm a female sub who was looking for a male dom, so that was convenient. But politically, that was so unacceptable to me that they basically accepted male dom, female sub because that could be seen as God's way, but they wouldn't accept the opposite. It just made me want to have nothing to do with them, and that was towards the very end of my desire to be a Christian. It was one of the things that slammed a final door on my desire to stay within this religion, because it just seemed so intolerant and unfair. So, my experience of abandoning my Christian faith made it a great deal easier to accept being kinky. I'm not sure I would have ever got to that point if I'd stayed as a Christian, because, it's not that there's anything in the Bible that says you shouldn't be a BDSM model. It's just that I kept meeting Christians who were judgmental in various ways about various sexual minority interests, and so I found it very hard to believe that my lifestyle and my career and my identity would be accepted. And in the end, it was much easier and felt much simpler to stop being a Christian and not to have to worry about it anymore, and it certainly made it very easy for me to fully embrace a kinky lifestyle in a very open way. Question 4. What are the things that the best dominants you've met have had in common? Oh, I like thinking about the best dominants I've met. I suppose, to be fair, I should answer in terms of the best dominants I have done BDSM with. There are 3 things that spring to mind. Firstly, they are observant. They observe what you say, they observe your body language. They don't ignore the signs you are giving them that you want more or you can't cope. The best dominants I've met are good communicators, and that doesn't mean they talk a lot. It means they talk and they listen and they observe, and I love that. Secondly, they don't bring a whole load of ego and arrogance to the play session. They might be playing a role where they are being quite arrogant, but the reality is they are prepared to stop and say sorry if they do something wrong. They're prepared to listen to feedback and respond to it, and they are aware that the act of doing BDSM together is a collaboration. It's not actually a performance that the dom does while the sub basically just claps. The doms and tops I've worked with and played with who understand that it's a collaboration, it's like a dance, those are the best doms to my mind. And thirdly, what all my favourite DOMs have in common is that they are trustworthy. They're trustworthy in that they are technically skilled enough not to make stupid, dangerous mistakes by and large, but I also trust them on a personal level not to harm me on purpose. So I've not met a whole load of people who I think would harm me on purpose, but in my long career there have been some. But I've met an awful lot of DOMs who have hurt me through lack of competence and just having not learned how to do things carefully and safely. And so my favourite DOMs have put in the work and the time to learn how to do this stuff safely, and consequently I trust them, and that is one of the most beautiful things to me about BDSM.
Well, this is an easy one for me. Basically, there's one fundamental trait that I found, particularly in Japanese dominatrixes, which was amazing, and that is that they could read their subjects so well. They were intuitive to the point of being psychic, and they knew how I would respond to their torture, and they really enjoyed watching me react to their torture, but they knew how I'd react, and they knew what to do to press my buttons. Also, trust. I once was in a situation where I was tied to a cross, and I'd agreed with the dominatrix, she was Japanese, I'd agreed with her before the session that she could cut me, and she cut me on my arm. Basically, when she cut me, it was a proper deep cut, and I still have a scar to show for it. And when she cut me, I saw how much joy and rapture she got from cutting me. So in the moment, in that state of BDSM trance, I offered her my other arm. I said, cut the other arm. And then I offered her my forearm. I said, cut the forearm. And then I said, cut the forearm on the left. So I had just got so sucked into the moment that I completely offered her to annihilate my body. And guess what? She just scratched me here. She scratched me here. She scratched me here. The only deep cut was here because she was a trustworthy dominant who knew that I had lost the plot under her domination. And she did the first cut for her, she did the next 3 cuts for me, and thankfully those little scratches have completely healed and you can't see them at all. But if she had taken advantage of me, I would have ended up with these 4 cuts in symmetrical positions on my arms, and I would have looked like a freak. Question 5, what would you advise to any beginner in BDSM? Well, I think the first thing I would say is that if you're in a submissive position, make sure that you completely trust the person you're working with or playing with, and make sure that you get each other. Make sure there's a fantastic rapport and that you're really comfortable with that person before you start to put yourself in any vulnerable situations. I think that's really important. The other thing I would say is if you are going on to the dominant side and you want to start dominating other people, I think you really need to make sure you know what the limits are and know what you're doing. And I think the only way you can do that is by talking to other dominants who are experienced. You do need to practice and you do need to understand what works and what doesn't. So if you're a beginner to BDSM, please research your sport. If you're dominant and if you're submissive, ask questions, open up, find out who that person is and make sure you are comfortable with them before you do anything.
Inevitably, I always want to talk to subs because while DOMs risk reputational damage if stuff goes wrong, submissives risk physical damage. So it feels like the stakes are higher for us. So I'm going to answer with submissives in mind, and I would tell you, firstly, your feelings matter. Being a good sub doesn't mean just enduring whatever a Dom wants to do to you. It's a collaboration and your feelings are as important as the Dom's feeling. Yes, you are playing a role where you are submitting, but that does not negate the importance of your feelings. Secondly, I would say check references, be safe. Do not just trust someone because they ask you to. In my profession, it is completely normal to write to other models who've worked with a particular producer or Dom and ask their opinion before you commit to doing it. And I would really like to see that normalised in BDSM play as well. I know some people are good at doing that, but I think it's an uncomfortable thing to do, and as a result, I don't think enough people do it. And I would say checking a few too many references is always better than not quite checking enough, because this is your body that you're putting on the line and your emotions as well, and you owe it to yourself to be careful. Question 6. What do you tell the uninitiated about BDSM?
Well, I think the first thing that I would say is that it's multifaceted. And I don't entirely agree with what Ariel said. I don't think it's just a game. It is for some people, and that's fine. But I think there are many other dimensions to BDSM. I think there's a very spiritual dimension. I always imagine there are sort of like a Venn diagram. There are 3 circles. And there's sensual, there's sexual, and there's spiritual, and they all overlap. And if you can get into that middle where the 3 circles overlap, then there you've got your nirvana. But for some people, absolutely, it's the sexual side from it is fantastic. I mean, I love to be restricted in latex, whatever. I love it. I love that feeling. It turns me on incredibly. And I could just stop there. But for me, there's a euphoria as well in submitting to the lady, submitting to the dominatrix. But then there's a sensual as well, because if you do start to push boundaries, if you do go beyond a pain threshold, you do actually start to get into a bit of a trance-like state. Beyond my limits, where a lot of these Japanese dominatrices took me, I really found a very spiritual and very pure and very sacred dimension to BDSM.
I tell them many things, but I think the most important thing is this, and it's really simple to sum up. BDSM is a game. It's not a political view, it's not a world view. I don't think this is what women should do. It's a game that you might want to play as though it was 100% serious, and I love to do that. But the fact is, it's for fun. So if it stops being fun, you should walk away. And if it's only fun for one of you, you should address that. And if you start to feel pressurised to live that way outside the bedroom or outside the parameters that you have agreed, then you should also walk away. This is not misogyny. This is a sex game. And it may be a really absorbing sex game that takes you way outside of the bedroom, but that is what it is, and you need to be capable of leaving it behind when one or both of you need to be equals as well. I hope you enjoyed my answers, and I hope you enjoyed Elizabeth's answers. I cannot wait to hear her answers and see how much we agree, because I'm perfectly aware that we might not agree very much, because being a submissive woman doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have that much in common with other submissive women, but of course that's part of the fun. So, thank you as always for joining me. Please, if you haven't already, pre-order my book, which I will be sending out soon. I'm going to go and sign the copies within the next couple of weeks. I will be back, and next time I speak to you, I'll be a published author. Please do check out the links below for my book and for Elizabeth's book, Exodai. Thank you. Goodbye now. Goodbye now. Goodbye. Bye-bye now. Bye.